and eczematous rashes. They face social isolation. Parents find it difficult to handle these kids who are very, sometimes to the point of being very stubborn, and they're not able to explain very often as to why the rash is occurring on their body. So these are the complexities of the disease which we are facing with as far as atopic eczema is concerned. Probably next only to psoriasis, this is one disease which probably has the worst morbidity rather than mortality, worst morbidity and psychologically sort of draining exercise, right from the first visit to explain to the patient and the bystander about what exactly the disease is, up to management where every type of drug has been tried, but we get relief far and few between. So the aim of treatment in atopic eczema is not very often cure of the disease, but fair good amount of control of the exacerbation, just like probably asthmatic or typical allergic rhinitis. So these are all diseases which have recurrent exacerbations and remissions. So I'll be just over the next hour or so, I'll just be going through what atopic eczema is, how to recognize atopic eczema, what are the pathogenic principles that we have identified so far, and what may be relevant in clinical practice as far as managing these patients are concerned. So you should be able to, at the end of the talk, you should be able to clinically correlate and recognize that this is probably a case of atopic eczema. And what I would hope is at the end of the presentation, mishaps in the form of using very strong irritants, misuse of topical corticosteroids are brought down to a minimum. So that is the aim of this lecture. Now, as per definition, actually, it's an eczema. So I thought I'll give you a brief overview of what an eczema is. Very often people do not know how to recognize an eczema even. So that is because skin lesions, especially eczematous lesions, have a range or a spectrum which ranges from acute eczema where it is oozing, you have pustular eruptions, you have breakdown of the skin, ulcerations. On the other hand, you have very thick lichenified skin. So how to recognize an eczema is probably essential before you go into atopic eczema. So that's why I'm just referring to what is eczema. Eczema is a reaction pattern of the skin, characterized in its acute stage by erythema, edema, vesiculation, oozing, and in its chronic stage by lichenification. So each of these words has a special relevance to understand. Reaction pattern of the skin. It is like somebody coming and slapping on the face and the skin reacts with an erythema, pain. Or if something gets into the eye, immediately the eye reacts with either a inflammation, with redness, with oozing or watering. So this is a normal. So it's a reaction pattern. Here when we mention a reaction pattern, we are referring to an inflammatory reaction pattern. Right? Second is acute stage by erythema, edema, vesiculation and oozing. It's self-explanatory. And chronic stage by lichenification. What is lichenification? Lichen, as we all know, is something which grows on the trees, just like an algae. So it is as if it is stuck onto the tree. Similarly, when you see a lichenified lesion of an eczema, it will be something similar to something stuck onto the skin. I'll show you the photograph how it looks. But there are three characteristics of a lichenified lesion. One is hyperpigmentation. It is more pigmented than the rest of the skin. Second is thickening of the skin. And third, you will have a increase in the skin markings. So say, for example, if it's the dorsum of the foot, you will find the skin markings, horizontal transverse skin markings are a lot more exaggerated than the surrounding skin. So that is how you recognize that it is a lichenified eczema, lichenified lesion. If it is lichenified, it is a chronic eczema which has occurred because of repetitive rubbing rather than scratching. When you rub, instead of rubbing, the pruritus becomes intense and then you start scratching. That is when the edema, erythema, and an acute phase response comes. So chronic eczemas can break down often and form acute on chronic, just like you say acute on chronic asthma. So you can have a chronic eczematous lesion going in for a acute exacerbation. Now, eczemas are broadly classified into acute, subacute, and chronic, and they can also be classified as endogenous and exogenous eczemas. So acute, as I mentioned, is very florid presentation. Chronic, as I mentioned, is lichenification, whereas subacute is somewhere in between. I'll show you the photographs as to how to recognize a subacute lesion. Now, why I'm presenting this particular classification is because a person with atopic eczema can present in any of the forms. It can be an acute form, it can be a subacute form, or it can be in a chronic form. Now, as far as endogenous and exogenous eczemas are concerned, eczemas are broadly endogenous. That means something which arises from within the body. Exogenous is something which arises from the external environmental influence. Like, for example, an irritant dermatitis. You apply an acidic substance or extremely alkaline substance, and you get a reactionary pattern of the skin that is called an irritant dermatitis. So there is an exogenous. You get an allergy to footwear. It is something exogenous. Or to a earring, that is exogenous. Or you are photosensitive, that is exogenous. Whereas here, endogenous eczemas are those which occur from changes within. Like, for example, a person develops a stasis, venous stasis on the foot. So that is because of an endogenous change which has occurred. Or a seborrheic, or even for that matter, a ectopic eczema. Ectopic eczema is an endogenous eczema. Now, these are three patterns I was talking about where you see different, all these three are actually atopic patients. But the one on the left is an acute eczema, where that girl has gone into oozing, edema, vesiculation, and crusting, and she was actually on homeopathic treatment. So the entire infective process got a little more exaggerated, and the inflammatory process also got exaggerated. The second one is a slightly reddened, the crust is all removed, and this is how some patients present to you with erythematous, well-defined lesions, which will heal and leave behind hypopigmentation. So you might be seeing the patient in this stage, in an erythematous stage, or you may be seeing the patient in a hypopigmented state. The third is an adult atopic who has repetitively rubbed his skin for a very long time and caused lichenification and thickening. So any of these is an eczematous response, but depending on the stage, your treatment or management will be entirely different. Here, on the chronic eczema patient, you can safely use a steroid with salicylic acid. Whereas in an acute eczematous patient, if you use a salicylic acid or a steroid ointment, you're likely to have a cellulitis developing there. So there, the stress will be on dealing with the eczematous oozing process, trying to control the oozing process, control the infective process. You should never apply a steroid on an acute oozing. You should never apply a moisturizer on an acute oozing lesion. You should always use something like a saline compress to soothe the lesion. So we call it soothe the acute and push or wipe out the chronic. So here you will use a moisturizer in a chronic eczema, whereas in an acute eczema, you will always prefer to use a soothing lotion. The other one, you can use some amount of a topical steroid, but you will not use a very occlusive moisturizer because it's a slightly reddened area. So you will use a medium strength moisturizer, something like a humectant or a mild moisturizer. Now, this is a classical presentation of a acute weeping eczema. This was a patient who had a footwear allergy on the left, and the other is a patient who had an insect bite reaction, following which that child was an ectopic, went on scratching that area, led on to an oozing and ulceration. Small blisters formed there, the blisters ruptured. So vesicles have ruptured and oozing you can see draining down. Yet another eczematous lesion. Here it is because of a Tinea pedis, that is the intertriginous area. There is a fungal infection compounded by a secondary bacterial infection where there has been a break in the skin, and that has led to an eczematous process in the surrounding area. So this is again another acute eczema because you're seeing there erythema, edema, vesiculation, and some amount of oozing and crusting, right? Third example, again, this is an acute eczema because there is an oozing, crusting, but there is no vesiculation here. But as long as there is an ooze, think of an eczematous process. This is an eczema which has got infected, where there is a secondary pustular reaction. Okay, there again you are seeing oozing, but predominantly you are seeing pustules because the lesion has been mismanaged with a lot of topical steroids and moisturizers. So it was treated with moisturizers, and that has occluded and caused more staph overgrowth along with the steroid, and the child was playing a lot and then developed a pustular reaction. So here your management schedule will be entirely different. You'll be using a lot more of topical antibiotic and systemic antibiotic if necessary, but instead of your saline compresses, you'll be using dilute potassium permanganate or an anti-infective solution like a bleach. Okay. Now, chronic eczemas, as I mentioned, are characterized by these three features. Now, this is an extreme example of a chronic eczema. This is a young girl. She was also an atopic. She had a lot of stresses at home, which made her, every time in the evening, she goes into a continuous process of itching and scratching. And largely it is rubbing using one foot over the other. So this continuous frictional movement is what causes this thickening. And so here you can see hyperpigmentation. Here you can see increased skin markings, and you can see the classical lichenified lesion. So whenever you see such lichenified lesions like these, there are two things which we have to ask the patient. One, ask the patient or the bystander whether there is a stress, psychocutaneous stress going on which is leading on to this, or the patient may be an atopic who would be going on for a repetitive rubbing. This is a little bit of an extreme example, but I will show you other presentations where it is lesser in intensity. So this is what I was mentioning earlier. Exogenous is divided into three: irritant, allergic, and photosensitive, whereas endogenous is divided into ascetotic, atopic, stasis, neurodermatitis, and seborrheic eczema. Now, as far as the epidemiology of atopic eczema is concerned, we are coming to the topic proper after having introduced you to eczemas. So it has a very high prevalence in the entire world, and it is more often reported in the Western world. And it is being seen more often now and recognized more often here in the Eastern world also, because our lifestyle has undergone a drastic change. So one of the theories which is put forward is something called the hygiene hypothesis. You must have heard of the hygiene hypothesis. Anybody? Please. More and more the hygiene, the lesser the exposure to the organisms, and therefore the response, the immune response is exaggerated because you have not been exposed to that particular environmental aid. So that one reason for an explanation. Second is the Western diet has a lot of gluten in it, which probably the Eastern world is not exposed as much. And the Western civilization has a lot of indoor activities, less of an outdoor activity. So probably the response to normal organisms which are present in the external environment, like a pollen or the exposure to aeroallergens, is much lesser in comparison to the Eastern. So these are all theoretical aspects which are propounded. But having said that, we are seeing a lot more atopic patients coming to our population too. Up to 20 to 30% of these are children, and only around 2 to 10% are adults. Now, what does this word atopy mean? The atopy word actually is a Greek word which comes from the word atopos, which means strange or unusual. So that was what was initially recognized by this gentleman called Besnier. So he said it is an unusual skin lesion, and that is how the word atopy came. Now, if you were to give a definition of atopy, when you're writing your answer script, you're asked to write about atopic eczema. This is the definition which you will use. It's an itchy, chronic, or a chronically relapsing inflammatory skin condition characterized by itchy papules or papulovesicles. Excoriations. Excoriations are linear marks in the breaks in the continuity of the skin. So excoriations will only occur when the child scratches with his or her nails. So they are linear scratches which are caused. So there will be excoriations and lichenification, typically in an extensor distribution in infants and flexural distribution in older children and adults. So the infantile eczema is different in this manner. The distribution of the lesions is entirely different. That is something which you all should remember, because the child may come to you at any stage. The child may present to you in the infantile stage, and you may be the first person to recognize and think of an eczema, an atopic eczema, if you know that atopic eczema can present as excoriated and itchy lesions or papulovesicular lesions. So that history taking at that point in time will be early enough, and the mother can be warned based on maybe a dietary challenge to be given or a dietary modification to be given, the type of lifestyle that has to be followed, the personal or family history of atopy which is there in the, all these discussions can take place much earlier, and you can recognize the disease much earlier. Because later on when we diagnose, what happens by the time the disease has established itself and the habits of the child have already been established. It's very difficult to get the child to undo certain habits. That is why early recognition of atopic eczema is important. Now, three main features are there in atopic dermatitis. One is pruritus. Pruritus is a must essential in all criteria for atopic eczema. Generalized pruritus is there in almost all patients with atopic dermatitis. It has a chronic or relapsing course. And thirdly, it usually begins during infancy, which is called the early onset atopic eczema, and occasionally in adulthood. Now, what causes this particular disease? So, what we know is what I have represented through this diagram. There are four main factors which have been identified. There are genetic factors. That is why most of these atopic patients will have parents or cousins or grandparents or uncles or aunts who would be having other features of atopic. Either it can be an atopic eczema, or it can be a rhinitis, or it can be an asthma, or it can be a conjunctivitis, or all four of them. The child itself may have 1, 2, 3, or all four together. So that also is individualized, highly individualized. Some children present only with a dermatitis. Some children present with a dermatitis with an atopic rhinitis. Some children have atopic rhinitis, dermatitis with an asthma. At a given point in time, the child may be having only one of those flare-ups. That is why there is a misconception among the local population that if you treat the skin disease, the asthma will flare up. What is happening is that atopic march is going on. And that is when most patients who have atopic dermatitis, once this subsides, the rhinitis and the conjunctivitis, or that matter, the asthma, comes up later. So it is a natural progression which is occurring. That is called the atopic march. Second thing is there is a break in the epidermal barrier. I will explain to you how the epidermis is to understand why the barrier is dysregulated and is important. Third is there is an immune dysregulation. The immunological response is exaggerated. The T cell response is exaggerated in these individuals. And fourth is the environmental influences in the form of staph overgrowth, Malassezia furfur overgrowth, and also aberrant response to viral diseases. So these children with atopic eczema have a higher tendency to have molluscum contagiosum. What is much higher in atopics? You have respiratory infections occurring more often in atopics. So basically, it is a T cell mediated immune response. So I have mentioned this already that you can have association with allergic rhinoconjunctivitis, asthma, food allergies, and rarely even an esophagitis. Where there is severe food allergies, you can find even a eosinophilic esophagitis. They may appear simultaneously or they may develop in succession. In infants and young children, more often we see atopic dermatitis and food allergies. Whereas older children, we usually see more often asthmatic attacks. And rhinoconjunctivitis is more often seen in adolescents. This is something which is a pattern which has been identified over the last 1 or 2 decades. More and more research as it is coming through. This is the pattern which has been recognized. And that is why they came up with this particular terminology called atopic march. Atopic march was a short note for DNB, dermatology residents, right? It can be a similar short note for you all. It is necessary for you all to know about atopic march. So this is the characteristic diagram of an atopic march, which you're expected to draw, wherein the y-axis, the x-axis has the years in age, and the y-axis the incidence or the peak, the percentage of peak. So around about 0 years, that means around 3 months, around about dermatitis will start. The blue line is the dermatitis, and slightly later the food allergy will start, which is the yellow line. Then you have around about 2 years or 3 years when the asthma slowly starts developing, and finally you have a rhinitis developing after around 5 to 10 years. That is the time. So this progression which occurs over a period of time is called the atopic march. And this is important because all the symptoms may not occur together. So this, depending upon the allergic response of the particular system involved, whether it be the skin is a route of entry. Then you have the food as a route of entry, the aerodigestive tract as a route of entry, and finally you have the nasal tract will be involved. So individual responses vary, and that is why this concept of atopic march has come through. Now, if you ask me for a criteria which is currently being used for atopic dermatitis, it is this particular criteria which is used recommended by the American Academy of Dermatology. So there was an initial criterion called the Hanifin and Riker criteria, which has now been changed to put up this criteria. This has three parts. One is you should have certain essential features that must be present and sufficient for diagnosis. First, I mentioned pruritus. Rubbing or scratching can initiate exacerbate flares, often worse in the evening, triggered by exogenous factors. Pruritus is a must in this. Second, typical eczematous morphology and age-specific distribution patterns. It can be the face, the neck, extensor extremities in the infants and young children, flexural lesions later on after that age, then sparing of the groin and axillae, and chronic or relapsing course. These three, pruritus, typical eczematous morphology, and chronic or relapsing course, if you see, you can safely diagnose that it is probably a case of atopic eczema. There are certain other important features which are not absolutely essential, but which may be seen as an association with atopic eczema. One is onset during infancy or early childhood. Second is personal or family history of atopy, that is IgE reactivity. So when you do a serum IgE, they will be elevated. Third is xerosis, dryness of the skin. Invariably, these children with atopic dermatitis have a very dry, lusterless, flaky skin. So that is something you can recognize only by palpating the skin of the patient. So when you palpate, either with the palm of the hand or the dorsum of the hand, you feel a slightly roughened skin. And it is very dry, and the child is most often itchy. Exacerbation after a bath means that is the child has a very dry and flaky skin. And the next are associated features. There are a lot of associated features which I will show you as photographs rather than as listing out all of these things. Right? So I'll go into that section later. But what I want you to emphasize on is the triggers which lead on to atopic flares. So one is the climate change. Second is the irritants like wool or rough fabrics. Third is infections like staph infection, molluscum, etc. or a URI. Usually you will find these atopic flares occurring after an upper respiratory infection. Doesn't come along with the upper respiratory. Once the upper respiratory infection subsides, a week or so later, when the immune reconstitution is occurring, that is when most of these children develop a flare-up, right? So whenever an atopic child comes to you with an upper respiratory infection, always warn them that there may be a flare-up, that they should watch out for a flare-up. And that is when your judicious intervention is required, whether to use a topical steroid or not. Then food allergies. There are multiple food allergies. I'll come to diet later. So these are called the usual criteria which are required for diagnosing a case of atopic dermatitis. So I've mentioned these four major factors. I'll go into a little bit of depth into this because this is something which is currently being mentioned as a very, very important factor. Is it the skin is defective and the immune response is secondary, or the immune response is secondary, the inflammation is causing the damage to the epidermis? We are not very sure about this. It's like the chicken or the egg. However, what you need to know that the epidermis comprises of 4 layers: the basal layer, the spinous layer, the granulus layer, and the stratum corneum. In atopics, it is the stratum corneum which is maximally affected. The stratum corneum layer has particular proteins called filaggrin, also called filament aggregation proteins. So that filaggrin is what keeps the stratum corneum bound very well, so that water does not evaporate. Otherwise, every time we went out into the sun, we would have wilted like a flower. All of us would have become shriveled, would have become dehydrated. The skin is a very important organ which maintains the hydration, and it also maintains the core body temperature. Now, once the skin is broken, then there is an easy entry of as well as exit of materials. So the entry of materials like aeroallergens or contact allergens, or for that matter, exogenous thermal stimuli or cold environment, or even microorganisms. All of these are things which will trigger the atopic patient to go in for a flare. So that is why it is important to understand why the epidermis break is important. So these children have a deficiency of a protein called filaggrin. And that filaggrin protein deficiency is probably the reason why these atopics get a flare-up. They have a basic structural defect in their epidermis. So the epidermal barrier is important. So these are this is one thing, that is the filaggrin is important. The second thing is the intercellular lipids. The lipids are the ones which are the oily film over the skin. Cholesterol is present in the skin, which prevents damage from occurring, thereby causing breakage of the skin. So these intercellular lipids are also lost in these patients. So they have a congenital or a hereditary deficiency of ceramide content. This ceramide is very, very important. A classic example in adults, if I were to take, we give a lot of hypolipidemic drugs for patients who are on coronary artery disease. After they have taken statins for a long time, they come to us with itchy, dry skin or a pruritus which is not responding to usual lines of treatment. That is because the skin cholesterol has come down, and thereby these patients are developing dryness of the skin. Something similar is occurring here. The epidermal lipids are lost, and thereby they are having a break in the continuity of the skin. That leads to a defective barrier and increased TEWL. TEWL refers to transepidermal water loss. So the water loss is very high. Coming to the immune defect which is occurring in this. This is an NEJM article which actually shows in simple steps what exactly is the immune response occurring. I know all of you all have had food. You all are feeling sleepy. I'm talking immunology here. I'll try to make it as simple as possible, right? Now, you know that there is a cell called the Langerhans cell. It is the first line of defense. It is like the policeman which actually recognizes the robber. So you have an aeroallergen or a cutaneous allergen, which through the IgE receptor is presented to the Langerhans cell. That Langerhans cell will actually release something called interleukin 16 and the MCP1 or the monocyte chemotactic protein. So it will recruit the monocyte, and that monocyte will undergo differentiation to form what is known as IDEC, or that is IDEC stands for inflammatory dendritic epidermal cell. And that will do two things. One, it will release interleukin 1, 6 and TNF alpha, as well as Th2 cytokines, which is interleukin 4, 5 and 31. These are the inflammatory mediators which cause most of the inflammatory responses. This is something which is often asked in most of your short notes now. Pathogenesis of certain inflammatory disorder. Either you'll have a Th1 response or a Th2 response. So in the acute phase of the atopic dermatitis, you have a Th1 response. Subsequently, the Th2 response becomes a Th1 response, and that is when you have chronic atopic patients. This diagram I want you all to remember so that you all can easily write out in your pathogenesis this particular inflammatory pathway or the immunological pathway. All of this is now clubbed in this particular diagram. I can share this with you so that you can understand. So there is a entry of the allergens, like environmental factors includes the allergens, the bugs, all of these are entering. On the other hand, you have an epidermal barrier breakage. Third, you have an inflammatory response occurring, and then the inflammation causes more epidermal barrier damage, and the entire process becomes a vicious cycle. That is why these atopic patients have florid immunological responses followed by secondary infection. To that infection, the body responds with a more inflammatory response and greater epidermal barrier disruption. That is what is going on in atopic. Similar thing goes on even in the respiratory tract. That is why you get respiratory attacks very often in asthmatics. Somewhat a similar response, immunological response, and the barrier response is going on. So I want you all to go through this particular slide too, so that you all understand the complex pathogenesis which is occurring, and this is the current concept that we have about atopic dermatitis. Lot of genes have been identified. That is why atopic eczema is a genetically transmitted disease. That is why in parents with atopy, you are more likely to find atopy in children. So family history is important even in the diagnostic criteria to think of a atopic problem. So certain genes, some of these genes have been mentioned. All of them I have listed here. Now, when a person with atopy comes, you should always ask for the history of what are the trigger factors which are occurring. So the clinical presentation is more often secondary to a trigger. The trigger for one atopic is different from a trigger for another atopic. One person may have an allergy to certain food substances like peanuts or cashew nuts or walnuts. The other person may have an allergy to sour curds. Another person may have an allergy to citrus fruits. A third person may have allergy to gluten. So you have to specifically ask the mother or the caretaker to look for these particular triggers, whether it is a food or it could be clothing. Wearing of wool clothing is well known to cause exacerbation of atopic eczema. Those atopics, there are two different types of atopics. Some atopics increase whenever they sweat a lot. So sudden changes in the weather, like for example, humid environment or wearing a polyester dress might exacerbate. So you have to give advice to the mother and educate the mother regarding the proper clothing which is to be used appropriately depending upon the child's response. So a very intelligent mother is an essential part of your clinical success. And how you communicate to the mother is equally important because you are the provider of information. They're looking forward to you for information. So you have to handhold initially, and then the mother and the child will be so intelligent enough to come back and tell you that this is the factor. I had a child who was around 3.5, 4 years of age, started going to play school, and they had identified like this after communication, they had identified that chocolates and nuts can produce allergies. This child, believe it or not, a 4-year-old child, every day there is a birthday party going on in the class, and this chocolates are shared. This child will keep it in the pocket, bring it back to the mother and give it to the mother and say, that is the level of intellect which they develop because they know the itching is worse than having a chocolate. They're very, very smart children. Atopic children have as far as I have observed, they have a much higher intellectual capability and ability to grasp whatever you're talking. And it is always, the mothers will also tell you something that these children learn things very fast. And they know what they want. They will make sure that they will get it by throwing tantrums, right? But they grasp things very fast. You teach them something from a book or from a video game, they grasp it very fast and they want to move to the next level. So that somewhere where there is a deficiency, probably the intellectual capacity compensates for it. And even when they speak to us, adult atopics, when they speak to us, they ask you why this is occurring, what should I do, what, everything. They have a good all-round knowledge, and the information seeking capability is much, much higher in these individuals. This is a personal observation which I have, but this is something which you can take it to your advantage because both the mother and the child are very receptive to information. So these triggers, all of these triggers you should be aware of. It could be food, clothing, infections, weather change, or it can be simple stress. I have a lot of teenage atopics who present with exam-related stress and exacerbations. They spend sleepless nights and they come up with an exacerbation. They get an upper respiratory infection, they come with an exacerbation. I think it was around a few months ago, I presented about circadian rhythm and the importance of inflammation. The circadian rhythm is a very, very important factor. Improper sleep leads to a lot of it. So these children are going through another vicious cycle. They have a lot of itching, they have a lot of scratching, they're not able to sleep properly, they are irritable, hyperexcited. Their mothers don't sleep properly, their mothers go into a depressive phase, and the child goes through an aggressive phase. So you're handling not one patient, but you're handling two different individuals and the demands of the family and social distancing. Social distancing in a different form because the child is isolated from the rest of the children. As soon as I had a neighbor of mine who was an atopic, they had come down from the US, and these three children, one has a atopic sneeze, the other person has atopic rashes. She used to sit for a music class. The moment the oozing lesion starts, the music teacher says, you get back today, pack up, you come after the rash is over. She comes back only after 1 week. She's so interested in music, but that isolation was terrible for them. Then they finally decided to move on and go back to their to the US and then continue studies from there. This is a sort of unfortunate situation that these children are put in. That is where we come in. As healthcare providers, we have to provide them the support and the actual information which is required, right? Now, when you are taking a history, what history is relevant to identify that this patient is having atopic eczema? First, as I mentioned, the history of pruritus that spontaneously comes without you're asking. The rash, you have to specifically ask, when did it start? A rash which has, say for example, it is an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old child and the rash is only 1 or 2 weeks history, the mother will say. Always ask, when did the first time the rash start? Or when would the symptoms start the very first time? Was it there in childhood? Then you recognize that the onset of the rash has been much earlier. It could be an infantile eczema and now progressing into an adult or a childhood eczema. So this history of the onset is very, very important. The duration is as much. The morphology of the rash. The morphology of the rash changes depending upon the time at which it arises. So sometimes the child may be present with only few papular rashes. The next visit, you might see the child with a vesicular and excoriated rash. Suddenly you feel your diagnosis was wrong. No, atopy has a spectrum of manifestations. So thereby, you will be able to arrive at a diagnosis that it is atopy and the child is, or the child skin and the inflammatory response is different. So vesicular eruption will occur not because it is herpes. It is because there is so much of inflammation. The epidermal cells, between the epidermal cells, there is water or a fluid percolating, causing vesicular eruptions. That is called spongiotic dermatitis. Right? That's a histopathological change that you see. So what you are seeing as a dynamic process. So you cannot say atopic presents only with lichenified lesions. You cannot say atopy presents only with papular eruptions. You can find a complex number of morphologic lesions. But the suspicion of atopy must be high whenever you're seeing with a combination of presentations. Distribution is again important. If it is an infantile eczema and you're looking for flexural lesions to diagnose atopy, it doesn't make sense. Because in infantile, you are going to get extensor involvement. You're not going to get a flexural involvement. On the other hand, if you have a flexural involvement in an older child or an adult, you're more likely to hit a diagnosis of atopic dermatitis than a contact dermatitis. That is where the distribution is important. Age-related progression. Initially started off extensor, then became flexural. Your diagnosis is more likely to be atopy. Child has associated symptoms like rhinitis or asthma or conjunctivitis, think of atopy. It could be and if you have a family history to add it on, you're pretty sure that it is atopic eczema. Now this slide will show you what are the different manifestations we should know as the presentation of an atopy. The distribution I'm showing there, the infantile atopic eczema, you can see the forehead, the cheeks, the neck area, the knee area. These are the reddened areas are the ones which are maximally involved in an infant. Whereas in an adult or a childhood, you will see more of flexural lesions. The neck, the cubital fossa, sometimes the axilla, the wrist area, the ankles and the popliteal fossa. These are the areas where usually the adult will. So this distribution map, you should have it as a mental map with you. Okay? Now coming to other things which may be seen along with the regular eczematous rash of an atopy. So one is eyelid eczema. Some children present just with eyelid eczema, intensely pruritic eyelid lesions which sometimes ooze. Or they may present with dryness of the lips, which is called an atopic cheilitis or a lip cheilitis. They have dryness of the lips, so they keep salivating or moistening their lips with saliva. Saliva is an enzyme. So it will further cause more protein digestion and cause more maceration and more cheilitis. So a person presenting with a cheilitis, think of atopy in the background. Could this be a presentation of atopy? The third thing is dyshydrotic eczema. That is usually seen as small papulovesicular eruptions in the margins of the fingers and sometimes as small vesicular eruptions on the palms. So that's also called dyshydrotic eczema. Juvenile plantar dermatosis is something which you see on the foot. You will see a glazed appearance on the foot along with small papulovesicles. So that is called juvenile plantar dermatosis. Some children present only with nipple eczema. Recurrent nipple eczema, think of atopy in a child. The nipple eczema occurs more often in those children who play or who are into jogging or running because of the continuous friction which is occurring. It's also called jogger's nipple. Then you have prurigo-like lesions. I'll show you how the prurigo-like lesions and nummular lesions. That also I will show you how they look. Now this is a classical presentation of an infantile eczema. You're seeing eczematous patches. I'm showing you all from now onwards. All of you all can be awake because you'll be seeing clinical photographs. No more theory. We'll come back to theory again. So this is a presentation of a classical infantile eczema. You're seeing on the cheeks bilateral areas, usually seen 3 to 6 months of age, with extensor involvement. And the one on the right is a extremely severe case where the child has florid oozing lesions. And you can also notice that the child has a periorbital pigmentation. That is because of the continuous rubbing which is occurring. That is causing a lichenified lesion there. And you can also see, sometimes you can see some flexural lesions. So you can have a mix of these lesions coming, but more often you will see extensor aspect in an infantile eczema. Some children may present with just these manifestations, pityriasis alba-like lesions, which is hypopigmented, mildly scaly lesions. Whenever you see these hypopigmented, mildly scaly lesions, you have to think of two things. One, nutritional deficiency, or you should think of atopic dermatitis presenting as pityriasis alba. Or the third possibility is a lesion of atopic dermatitis, which was a subacute eczema, which I had shown earlier, has left behind a post-inflammatory hypopigmentation. These are the manifestations which we see in children. This is what I was referring to. You're seeing polymorphic lesions. You're seeing a few papules, papular vesicles. You're seeing excoriated lesions, breakdown of the skin, erythema. So when you have to strip the patient and see. That's something which I forgot to tell you. Always, when you are dealing with an atopic for the first time, strip the patient and see to see the distribution. And you will get a lot of clues when you start examining each section separately. So no pardon if you have not examined and seen a toilet seat dermatitis. This child may be presenting to you just with these lesions. The mother will show only the hand. You are okay with it. And they say there's a rash at the back. But when you put the patient on the prone position and you see beneath the buttocks on the posterior aspect of the thigh, you see a U-shaped lesion, then you will say that is probably toilet seat. That eczematous rash will persist, but this may be treated and that may not have been notified. Or that may be the presentation only without any of these lesions. Then from the toilet seat dermatitis, you may be able to make a diagnosis that probably this child is atopic. So both ways it works to actually examine the patient completely. This is chronic atopic eczema, which I was referring to. A little more adult patient with some amount of lichenification has started. You can see the increased skin markings there. You can see the pigmentation there on the left. This is on the ankle and on the dorsum of the hand where they tend to scratch repeatedly. This is in the African population, and sometimes in Dravidian population who are darker, they will have a presentation like this. So you can see the periorbital eczema. You can see the forehead involvement. You can see some amount of scaling, pigmentation, lichenification. So it is going more and more into a lichenified state here. This is very, very early presentation as mild papular eruptions only. I refer to that sometimes you can present only as papular eruptions. Nipple eczema, lip cheilitis. This is what is known as prurigo nodularis. Or these are areas where the child picks on itself to scratch. See, what is itch and what is scratch? Itch is an unpleasant sensation which evokes the desire to scratch. And scratch is a pleasurable sensation which gratifies the itch. Isn't it? It is supposedly one of the most pleasurable. So when we are scratching, what are we doing? We are actually converting the itch to a pain. So the same pathway goes for both. The itch pathway and the pain pathway are the same. Both are through A delta and C fibers. So whenever we are scratching, we are converting the itch sensation to pain. So by scratching, these children get a lot more satisfaction and comfort. That is why they pick on these lesions. And that is how they develop small papulonodular eruptions. So when you strip and see this multiple areas all over this, you are finding this, think of atopic dermatitis. But this can also occur in another condition wherein they are psychocutaneous stressed. So the intense stress psychologically can also bring out such. This is more often seen in around 8 to 10 years and beyond, up to teenage, maximally seen in teenage age group. That is when they do it by themselves, when nobody is seeing, or when they are occupied with, not occupied with work. They think about their problems and they go in for repetitive itching and scratching. This is called nummular eczema. Nummular means coin shaped or disc shaped. Numismatics means it's the discipline where people are interested. It's a hobby where people are interested in coin collection. So each of them is very well defined coin shaped or discoid eczematous lesions. So this is another presentation of atopic eczema. Atopic eczema can sometimes present with papular eruptions only and some areas of excoriation. Another entirely different presentation of atopic eczema. Keratosis pilaris. Here what you are seeing is fine keratotic papules. Usually you will see it on the extensor aspect of the arms. Most of us also have actually. So you will find on the outer aspect of the arms and sometimes on the buttocks and the thighs. Those are areas where you find in the hair follicle keratin plugs. So there is an aberrant keratinization going on here in these patients, and constant rubbing and friction can also produce this sort of a keratosis pilaris like presentation. So this is another presentation of. So these are all the associated features which are seen with atopic dermatitis. I mentioned keratosis pilaris, xerosis, ichthyosis or dryness. Then Denny Morgan fold. This is something which is often asked in a short case, a clinical case, where if you have not examined for a Denny Morgan fold, they might reprimand you, because what you're looking at is a double skin fold here. Usually, most of us have a very smooth skin fold in the infraorbital area. But those who are atopic, you will find a double skin fold. This was something identified by Denny and Morgan. That's why it's called atopic pleats or Denny Morgan folds. So that is a sign of an atopic. Periorbital pigmentation and infraorbital pleats are both features of atopic eczema. I'll show you a few of my clinical photographs. What I showed you was all textbook pictures. So this is a young child who presented with atopic eczema. Why I've kept the biscuit there is, I took a photograph with the biscuit because biscuit is a notorious thing to aggravate atopy. It's gluten. Most of these children love to have such things, and the best specifying thing is to give a biscuit. And what do biscuits contain? It contains maida or refined wheat flour. It contains additives which are meant to prevent it from decaying. So it contains either antifungals or antibacterial agents which are added as preservatives, right? You have coloring agents, or for smell you have a vanilla essence, or you have a chocolate flavoring agent. So you are giving additionally that. If you are using something which is an antiseptic or an antibacterial agent or an antifungal agent, isn't it being consumed every day and causing decolonization of the gut? We seldom realize how much of biscuits these children are eating. In a packet of biscuit which is bought at home, is 1 or 2 is given to the guest and the rest 8 are eaten by the child. Isn't it? So it's the easiest soother that you can find. But when you look at it very, very carefully, it can be a cause for altered gut microbiome, isn't it? And altered gut microbiome can flare up atopics. Gluten can flare up atopics. So recognizing something simple as a biscuit or a chocolate or a nut or a food substance which the child is favorite is, talking to the mother, we will get a lot of these ideas. That is where you will be able to intervene intelligently and usefully to the mother. These are varying presentations of atopic eczema in this child. Another with cheek eczema. You notice that repetitive cheek eczema has caused some amount of lichenification, started here, right? Repetitive rubbing. You can see the atopic eczema with the neck involvement and the cheek involvement here. I had showed in that textbook photograph. This is what I was referring to as subacute presentation. It's neither acute where there is oozing or nor chronic with lichenification. Here you are having a subacute eczema presentation. And this is the persistent itch. And these children who itch, who are atopic and who itch, do so in a rebellious mood. When the child is scolded, when the child doesn't get anything, immediately the response is to scratch and itch more. I'll show you this particular video. This is a flexural lesion. I'll show you this particular video where I think it's, I think it's there coming, or I'll show you the video if I have it. This is the adult phase where the child has actually grown up around the adolescent, who will develop with these sort of lesions, just vague eczematous lesions with a little bit of lichenification. You can see even on the chest, and you can also see the bilateral nipple eczema which is seen in that individual. So this is a classical atopic individual, and he also had a flexural lesion, and dorsum of the hands were also affected. This is called Dennis sign, which is more often seen in scabies, but you can also incorporate it here because see, children who are very small cannot use their hands to scratch. Round about less than 5 months of age, they don't use their own fingers to scratch. They use the other leg to scratch, right? This is something which is seen in, more often we use it as a marker for intense itching, and more often we diagnose scabies with this suspected scabies. That means it is an intense generalized pruritus. The intensity of the pruritus is very high. So even in atopics, sometimes you find children using this technique rather than using their hands to scratch that area. They can pick on those lesions, and I don't know whether this video will run. Let me see. I'm sorry. It was worth seeing that the child is continually itching and scratching, and because he just wanted to get out of the room, that is all he wanted. And he used this as a response to show his displeasure. So itching sometimes is a response to displeasure or anger. The child can shouts, wails, and also itches. So this is very, very classically seen in atopic. It's a cry which is very different, right? Oru vashi area chori ennu parayunnadinte typical example aanu, right? Now this is what I was referring to: Dennis lines, prurigo papules, and a classical case of nummular eczema which I was able to get. Keratosis pilaris, again the atopic. Pityriasis alba. This is just a refresher because this is the sort of skin you are going to see, not the textbook photograph skin. That's why I'm showing both. Palmar hyperlinearity, that can also be a presentation of atopics. This is an adult atopic, which actually a friend of mine, we were discussing on a discussion forum recently. This is an adult atopic. He has multiple morphology. He is atopic, already known to be atopic. He has these flat eczematous patches on the chest and on the back, and he has these prurigo-like lesions on the thigh, as well as on the flexors. So this gentleman, when you asked, he had a remission of his atopic problem. He went to the Gulf, and he had a lot of personal stresses at that point in time. That is why he went to the Gulf. And once he went there, it was really bad. He didn't have these lesions when he was in India. So it is not an exogenous response. It's an endogenous response where stress has produced this sort of a response. That is what I wanted to highlight here. Adults, you will find, unlike young children who have triggers as food, diet, or infections, in adults, more often you will see stress and sometimes infections as a cause, or weather change. Sudden weather change may be the trigger. So you should be able to guide the individual based on the trigger. So this is how I explain to the patient. If you have a genetics, so if you say genetics, they wouldn't understand. So you are like a loaded gun. You have come with these factors. You just have to pull the trigger and the bullet is fired. Similarly, you are coming with that ഒരു പ്രത്യേക ദേഹക്കൂറ് നിങ്ങളിലുണ്ട്. അത് ശരീരത്തിലുള്ളത് പുറത്തേക്ക് പ്രത്യക്ഷപ്പെടുന്നത് നിങ്ങൾ ഇങ്ങനത്തെ ഓരോ ട്രിഗറുകൾ. So you have to list out the triggers and tell them to identify. So they become participatory in your clinical experience, not just writing an antihistamine or an antibiotic and say, try this also. You should be able to identify what is a trigger which is causing the exacerbation. Now, what are the complications which can develop in a case of atopic eczema? This also you should be able to identify. The most common complication is infections, because this is a secondary staph overgrowth. Staph overgrowth can lead to breakdown and ulceration, and pyodermas. Recurrent pyodermas are the ones who go in for post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. So whenever patients who are atopic and who are recurrently atopic, or who have undergone homeopathic or Ayurvedic treatment, come to you and they have pustular eruptions, or they have purulent areas, and you're suspecting a strong bacterial infection, never forget to send a urine routine examination. That is your first indicator to say that probably the patient has a PSGN. And believe it or not, much more than streptococcus, staph glomerulonephritis. Now, that is why the terminology is IRGN, infection-related glomerulonephritis. Post-staph glomerulonephritis is even more dangerous and has more mortality, especially in immunosuppressed or immunocompromised individuals. So always remember, staph should be treated immediately. So even if you are giving a steroid in a person who is having an acute exacerbation of a atopic eczema, give the first dose of antibiotic. Allow the staph infection to come down, and then you start your steroid. It is much wiser, because you would have taken care of the nearly 80 to 90% of the bacteria would have been taken care of in first 2 or 3 doses of your antibiotic. So you're putting the patient in with an acute exacerbation of atopy. I make it a policy first to start an antibiotic, a staph coverage antibiotic the first day, and give an antihistamine. Only when I come for rounds the next day will I start a steroid, because by the time this antigenic response would have been taken care of. Because there is another theory called the super antigen theory, where staph acts as a super antigen to cause excited inflammatory response and intense inflammation. So you start your dose of steroid first. What happens? You are causing a immune suppression, and thereby your staph antigenic response also will be exacerbated once you withdraw the steroid. That's why always I prefer at least to give a antibiotic first and then follow it up with a steroid. This is a infected hand eczema. There's a particular entity called eczema herpeticum or Kaposi's verrucoliform eruption. This has been asked as a short note in dermatology. I don't know in pediatrics whether they are. These patients who have extensive herpes infection. Herpes usually is seen as small vesicular eruptions here and there. These patients develop a disseminated herpes-like eruption. And this is a classic textbook picture where initial herpetic lesion and then progressing on to central crusted areas, well-defined small crusted areas all over the body. They are toxic. You can even lose the patient with this. That is why immediately it is necessary to recognize this and treat accordingly. So it's a life-threatening emergency as far as we are concerned. So some of these patients whom you have treated for an atopic exacerbation with a topical corticosteroid, send the patient home, and 3 days back or 1 week later, the patient comes back with a florid eruption like this. Think of Kaposi's verrucoliform eruption. It will look very much like varicella. That is why it's called verrucoliform eruption. Now, how do we differentiate whether it is varicella or Kaposi's verrucola? If you can find a vesicle, take a Zank smear out of that and then put it under the microscope and look for multinucleate giant cells. That will give you a clue that it is probably a viral infection that you are dealing with. Am I clear? So there are 3 criteria which are used. I'll come back to the criteria. One is called the classical Hanifin and Riker criteria, which has nearly 22 other associated symptoms. All of this I have mentioned here. If you notice, I mentioned nipple eczema, I have mentioned cheilitis, I mentioned bleeding organ fold, I mentioned orbital darkening, pityriasis alba. All of these were considered as associated features. When you find this feature, think of atopy. But what you need classically is pruritus, typical morphology, chronic or relapsing dermatitis, personal family history. These 4 things are mandatory. Another easier diagnostic criteria is UK Working Party criteria, and what I mentioned now as the Journal of American Academy of Dermatology guidelines, consensus confidence criteria. Now coming to management of these patients. So now you know how an atopic patient can present. You have seen the varied manifestations, right? Now you should know how to manage it, whether you are in the periphery or whether you are a consultant. You should know how to manage these patients. So first and foremost is education, education, education. I take at least around 15 to 20 minutes of my first atopic consultation patient. At least 15-20 minutes goes in educating these patients because they are anxious, because they are worried. They are people who have been misguided or guided but confused. All of this you have to take it upon yourself, right? So it's your duty to explain in very simple and plain language as to what the disease is, what triggers the disease, what could have been the trigger for this particular event where the exacerbation has occurred, what can be done to identify the triggers, what is the responsibility of the mother to do that or the caretaker. Sometimes the mother may be in a situation where it's a large joint family, some cousin or her brother or grandfather or father-in-law goes and gets chocolates for this child every day. So she is in a bound state where she cannot say no. You have to explain how to circumvent that also, right? You have to explain that it's your child and you have to explain that the doctor has said, so nobody is going to buy chocolates at home. Not the child will not be given. Other cousins have it, whereas this child does not have it. It is not possible. So you have to give an alternative to chocolates. So you can always give something like a candy. A candy will not have as much of high protein with nuts. So that you should find alternatives or get a taste for more Indianized foods like പരിപ്പൊടിയോ അടയോ something of that sort. ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ വീട്ടിൽ അവല് നനച്ചിട്ടാണ് കഴിക്കുന്നത് വെച്ചാൽ the child develops a taste for that. Once in a while you can give, but on a regular basis, if the child is having the same thing as a trigger and causing an acute exacerbation, so that is where the education of the mother and the caregivers is important. You have to explain the chronic relapsing course. It is something like giving a bad diagnosis, but you have to give it every time. It has a relapsing course and therefore you have to be patient with this child. It is like managing a child with a neurological disease or an epileptic disorder or a cerebral palsy disorder or a mentally retarded child. Similarly, you have to handhold a lot and tell about the chronic relapsing course. You have to be a partner in management. You have to help the mother to manage the acute flares even if you are not there. So there are some really intelligent mothers who know that they have to give a topical corticosteroid only for 5 days. They'll use it for 2 to 3 days. They'll call me and say, I've used for 2 to 3 days. Should I continue because the lesions are still a little more eczematous? Then I will change over to tacrolimus like you do. So, and they know steroid has its side effects. It should be used in acute flares. That means that you have succeeded in educating the mother about the good use and the misuse of topical steroids. So there lies the success of your treatment. So you should be able to explain to the mother about it. Control rather than cure should be your aim. Don't promise cure and then next year the patient lands up with something else and that doctor offered me cure and she is running around. Look, he does not even have remorse about it. That's the usual refrain. So be honest to the patient, they will be honest to you. Then identify the triggers, help them, guide them in identifying this. A food diary, if necessary, can be kept. Or what was the child doing when the acute exacerbation started? Or a change in the routine or habit, you have to identify. Address their concerns, anxiety, stress, fear, all of these are there in the family. You have to address them. And you have to address two issues. Earlier, it was only about steroid use. Now it is about steroid phobia. The moment certain mothers or parents come, doctor, you're not giving steroids, no? So then you have to explain why steroid is important at a certain point in time and why you should not use it without a prescription. That you have to emphasize before the child and the family leaves the room. Steroid phobia is something which we are dealing with now these days. So it depends on how effective your communication is towards that. Skin cleansing and care. This is a very, very important part as far as atopic management is concerned. Why? Because epidermal barrier defect is there in atopics. So you have to manage with appropriate cleansers and appropriate skin care. So you should always use fragrance-free, non-soap cleansers. Non-soap means that which has a pH of between 7 and 8. All soaps are either sodium or potassium molecules. So they are potassium with a base. So finally, you end up with a highly alkaline soap, which will degrease the skin and cause more dryness. That causes more breakage of the epidermal barrier. So it should be soap free. So ask for either a soap free or a Syndet. A Syndet it's a short form for synthetic detergent, which is a soap is made with a high alkali and then brought down, the pH is brought down to 7. So that it is in close proximity to the pH of the skin. The skin pH is acidic. It's 4.5 to 5.5. And you're using an alkaline substance to degrease the skin. So if the child already has a epidermal defect, then it will worsen. That is why we want you to use either a Syndet or use a soap-free, fragrance-free cleanser. Fragrance itself can cause irritation. Bath. This child gets great relief whenever the patient is put for a bath because hydration occurs. These mothers keep on repeatedly bathing the child, which is even worse because that is going to cause more epidermal barrier breakage if you keep wetting it very often or for very long periods of time. So each duration of the bath should not be more than 5 to 10 minutes. And preferably, if the child is irritated, use wet compresses, but not always a bath. A bath is not the absolute answer to this. And every time they bathe, some mothers use either soaps or bleaches, thinking that it is an infective process and you have to keep it squeaky clean. They are doing more harm. This is something you have to explain to the mothers. Avoid hot water baths. Why? No. If you are given biryani, which is made with a lot of oil, right? You try to wash it off with soap, it doesn't go, but it will go with hot water added. Have you noticed? Hot water has the ability to remove lipids much better. So it degreases the skin a lot more if the child is given repeated hot water baths. So it should always be lukewarm water baths, never hot water baths. Hot water is good for the child. The child wants hot water because it converts it to pain. Thereby the child is happy to have a hot water bath. But hot water bath, if given excessively, can cause damage to the epidermis of the skin. Avoid abrasives. You have a lot of abrasives around in the market as well as in the local population. Inja and Nanmeni and Chagri and Chervair and Kadalapodi and Vaga and. So all of these are things which are commonly used in the local population. You should ask. You should never ask, do not use this or do not use this in the paraya. What do you use for cleansing? Then that will come out. That history taking is very important. What do you use as a cleansing method? Do you use a soap? Do you use a regular soap? Do you use an abrasive along with that? Do you brush? Do you clean? Then immediately ഞാൻ thoroughly clean ചെയ്യും. നന്നായിട്ട് ഉരച്ച് തേച്ചിട്ട് കുളിച്ചാലേ ഒരു സമാധാനമുള്ളൂ. ഇങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ വെച്ചുകൊണ്ട് നടക്കുന്നത് എങ്ങനെയാ പറ്റുക? This is the usual refrain. So you realize that the mother is the one who is doing the harm, or the grandmother or the mother-in-law is the one who may be giving a bath because the mother is involved in the kitchen. So I make it a point to tell, preferably if you get a time, you give a bath. Don't let others give a bath because you know what I have told you. So single, just like we say, some cars have to be handled by a single driver. That has a better resale value. Single driver ridden. Similarly, the child should be handled by the most intelligent and the most informed person, which is the mother. And you will notice the dramatic change which occurs in the family once the positive change occurs in the atopic. Once the atopic starts reduction, there is a reduction in the itch, automatically the family starts sleeping better. The irritation in the family is much better. The husband and wife get closer much better, right? Responsibilities keep getting shared much better because the child can wreck a family if it is atopic and really in bad shape. Am I clear about this? So education is the most important thing as far as treatment is concerned. Then what about bathing oils? They'll ask you, which oil should I use? Any oil as long as the child is comfortable. Do not use oil when it is oozing. These are two things which you should always remember. You can use badam oil, olive oil, coconut oil, but don't use mineral oil as far as possible too much. But sometimes you need to give mineral oil when the skin is very dry. Like for example, whatever you're using as Vaseline or you're using as liquid paraffin is actually mineral derivative. It's a petroleum derivative. So encourage them to go in for vegetable oils and mineral oil occasionally. But mineral oil, the good thing is it lasts longer. It lasts up to 4 to 6 hours. Whereas a vegetable oil will evaporate very quickly. That is why it is not very popular. But having said that, the vegetable oils like olive oil or coconut oil or badam oil has a higher amount of linoleic acid, which is and arachidonic acid, which is a anti-inflammatory agent. The other one holds water better, but this one has a better anti-inflammatory agent. That is why we still prefer to use vegetable oils much more effectively, and it is easily available and cheaper. In fact, a jar of Vaseline costs so much more. So every month they have to add this into their daily grocery list. So something which is available there, you should also consider the social structure of the family, right? There may be some people some clients who might come and ask you that they want the high end only. Give them 1,200 rupees moisturizer. I don't say anything because they can afford. What is that 1,200 rupees moisturizer going to give them? Filaggrin degradation products. So it will help to repair the filaggrin. But sadharana population. But if there are people who need that, you can always give. There are certain brands which I would like to take. Aveeno, Cetaphil, Restoraderm. These are all things which contain filaggrin rich material and additional ceramides and lipids which will alter the barrier and improve the barrier. So you can use it as a therapy to restore the barrier, and once the barrier is restored, ask them to go back to their original one. So this is again a bridge or a hybrid where you use the expensive material to tide over a crisis. Am I clear? Then chlorinated water. This is something which again atopics find it very difficult to go to a swimming pool where chlorine water has been used, because that's going to cause more epidermal damage. So you have to make them circumvent it. The child wants to go for swimming, but chlorinated water is a problem. So what do we do? Immediately after that, the child has to take another bath with preferably an acidic substance. So you use either an acidic substance or a gentle skin cleanser. Those which contain cetyl alcohol or stearyl alcohol. We have Cetaphil gentle cleansing lotion. So ask them to take a bath with such things. It will reduce the amount of inflammation. Because chlorine is a bleach and can cause epidermal damage. Moisturizers. When to apply a moisturizer? Very often asked by the mother. Moisturizers are preferably applied after bath. Why after bath? Because all the corneocytes are dry and they are shriveled. The cells are shriveled like this. So when you apply a moisturizer, before bath you apply and then wash it off, it doesn't have any effect. Once you take a bath, the water percolates into the epidermis and the corneocytes will swell and the tight binding will take place between the corneocytes. And this is particularly sealed by the moisturizer which is used after that. That is the reason we say that you should use a moisturizer after bath. Allow the water to percolate. That's why give around 5 to 10 minutes for the water to percolate. Tap it dry, pad it dry, and then apply a thin layer of moisturizer. Some parents are over enthusiastic about using moisturizer. That is also to be discouraged. Next time when they come for your follow-up visit, ask them how much of moisturizer they are applying. And if possible, ask them to show it on the hand. Then you will realize how mothers apply moisturizer. Some people will take it like this. This is one method of applying. Some people will be very careful about small amount will be applied. A very small amount just to barely create a barrier on the skin. That is what is required. Never allow them to use moisturizers excessively, because if you use excessively, what happens? It will occlude the sweat pores and cause miliarial rash or a sweat retention problems. That will in turn lead to abscess formation and staph overgrowth. So you will have furunculosis developing the next 2 visits. if excess moisturizer is applied, especially liquid paraffin related. So it is your duty also to demonstrate, if possible, if time permits, to and educate regarding how the moisturizer is to be applied. Then what to use, whether to use a emollient, a humectant, or an occlusive agent. Now I am introducing three different terminologies as far as you thought it was as simple as using a Vaseline or a moisturizer. There are three different agents which are used. So occlusive agents are those which are actually occlude and trap the water inside. So they are occlusive agents. Whereas humectants, they are low molecular weight substances. They have water attracting capabilities. Whereas emollients, they have the ability to install small droplets of oil into the cracks between the desquamating corneocytes in the dry skin. So three different ways they will act. So I have given some of these which are humectants, which are emollients, and which are occlusive. Most of what we are using, either it be liquid paraffin, mineral oil, petrolatum, which is Vaseline, propylene glycol, silicone based, all of these are occlusive. They are just acting as a barrier. More effective ones will be to use emollients or natural lipids, which are usually derived from fish. That's why you will find something which has a beeswax, squalene based would be much more expensive because it's difficult to extract it from the fish or the aquatic matter. Or something like linoleic acid or oleic acid added, that moisturizer will be more expensive because they will have these emollients added. So these are one of the better agents as far as anti-inflammatory action is concerned. So it not only retains the moisture but also has an anti-inflammatory action. Now coming to topical corticosteroids, most abused of all the topical agents as far as I am concerned. We have a task force run by our organization called the IADVL, Indian Association of Dermatovenereal Allergists, called the IADVL Task Force Against Topical Steroid Abuse, ITATSA we call it. We went even up to the court to say that it has to be given only on prescription, just like a morphine or a pethidine is given. It's a Schedule H drug. After much fighting, now it is made a Schedule H drug. But companies won't listen. They have other ways of identifying general practitioners who want to use topical corticosteroids, irrespective of whether it is required or not. And eczema responds beautifully to topical steroids. The child and the parents, everybody learned there is an easy technique. The visit to a doctor is 100 rupees, 300 rupees, consultation fee, travel with or without another family member, the wait in the pharmacy, the wait in the consultation room, all of this taken into account. It is better to go and buy a topical steroid and use it. Anyway, the doctor is going to give the same thing. This is the mentality which most of the parents would have. So how do you circumvent that? So you have to instill a little bit of fear in them about the misuse of topical steroids, but at the same time you have to tell them that it is a useful thing. Now you will also have a doubt whether should I give a cream, an ointment, or a lotion. Large areas you can give a lotion. Very sensitive areas like the flexures, always give a gel base or a cream base, right? Never apply an ointment in a flexural area or a hairy area. Say either if you give it in the axilla or the flexural areas, you give an ointment base, and this child keeps on playing. There's a lot of friction and maceration. Finally, it ends up with more breakage of the epidermal barrier. So which to choose where is something, again, it should be judiciously done. So this child with the acute eczema, what am I going to do here? What I did was simple hypertonic saline compresses. Saline can include just simple salt which is available at home. Take a clean starched or laundered cloth, fold it in 4, soak it in this salt water and place it on the area where the lesion is. Now they'll ask you how much salt is to be applied. A rough estimate is for every glass of water, about 1 teaspoon of table or rock salt is good enough. But if you're using about quarter bucket of water, a rough estimate would be used to use about half a handful of rock salt. Mix it thoroughly. Dip this 4-folded, 4-ply cloth in that. Wring it a little off with excess of water and then place it on the area where the eczematous lesion is. Leave it for about 5 to 7 minutes. In between, it gets dry. So ask them to use a little bit of this water, drop it again onto the cloth. So that way the cloth becomes moist and the crusts are all removed, clean. If the nursing care is perfect, within 24 hours, this will become clean. Just 2 applications of saline compresses is good enough. So here what we follow is a principle of less is more. This is not about using high-end antibiotics like piperacillin, tazobactam or meropenem here. You don't have to be so overawed by the situation. What you have to do is a simple technique of either using a saline compresses or maximum you can use single application of dilute potassium permanganate. That will take care of the staph bacteria here, right? So that will remove the crust, the staph is taken care of, the inflammatory response is taken care of. We want the epidermal barrier to be restored. Give topical antibacterials for about 3 to 5 days. Allow the infection to settle down. Give systemic antibiotics because it is around the ear and the face. So you have a connection with the central nervous system. So always make sure that you give a systemic antibiotics when there are pyodermatous lesions on the face. When there is fever, lymphadenopathy or area of the faces which is in close proximity to the brain, always give a systemic antibiotic. This is an indication for systemic antibiotic. But otherwise, usually you can get away with even topical antibiotics and saline compresses. That would be sufficient to manage this sort of children. Second stage, if you are getting a child in a subacute eczematous stage, again, warm saline compresses. Here, I have not used hypertonic. Just isotonic saline is good enough because there is no crusting. You don't have to cleanse the wounds. You don't need any antibiotic much here. So you use just warm saline compresses. You can use a steroid antibiotic combination, but there is an argument whether antibiotic should be added or not. Even a plain topical steroid would be sufficient. You can use either tacrolimus, which is a topically available. The same tacrolimus which you all give for renal transplantation patients is topically available. It acts through the receptor and blocks the IL-2 receptor, and thereby the inflammatory process is taken care of. Tacrolimus is an effective and steroid sparing agent. So during the acute flare, you use a steroid, and after the flare is done, then you switch over to tacrolimus. Then, of course, you can use emollients, which I mentioned about. Chronic lichenified eczema, you can use either a plain steroid, which is slightly more potent. So here, I want you to also read about the different types of steroids which are available, the classification of steroids, whether they are low potency, mid potency, or high potency. Always in children, always preferably use low potency or maximally mid potency. Do not use a high potency unless it's really warranted. Like for example, you are dealing with a very thick lichenified plantar eczema or a palmar eczema, you need to use a topical corticosteroid which is of high potency, use it. Because the absorption of a high potency steroid in a child with an epidermal barrier defect with a vasodilatation is very, very high. So what you are going to end up after about 6 months of usage is a HP axis suppression with a Cushingoid habitus. You will have a child who will have electrolyte disturbances. You will not recognize the child is lethargic, and the mother comes and keeps telling you, you never think of cortisol suppression at all. You or somebody would have given a very potent topical steroid, which may be being repeated by the doctor, either child or the mother. So whenever you give a potent topical steroid, do not give for more than 14 days. And I make it a point now to write, do not use beyond the prescribed period. Then you are protected. Topical steroid should not be given, prescription should not be given more than 14 days. Where you're coming across something which is a lichenified lesion, maximum you can go up to 1 month. Ask them to rely more on moisturizers, less on topical corticosteroids. Then sometimes we use intralesional injection of steroids in prurigo lesions, which I showed. We might give intralesional steroid injections. Now, are vaccinations problematic in these atopics? This has been a very often asked question. It is not contraindicated routinely as only small amounts of egg protein are used because egg is something which can trigger these atopics. Having said that, there are several atopics who come back with an exacerbation after a vaccination, especially the live vaccines or the egg protein based vaccine. So such patients, you should be forewarned yourself that a vaccination can produce a acute exacerbation of an atopic eczema. Then only can you forewarn the mother. So what are you going to forewarn the mother? Not that the child is going to develop an acute exacerbation. If there is an exacerbation, report immediately. Otherwise, they'll say you sue you and they'll say that you gave a medication which caused an exacerbation. You have to explain to them that it is known to occur. Some allergies can occur in certain individuals. Then risk of herpes simplex is much higher in these patients with atopic eczema. Are you aware of this fingertip unit concept? Now, if I prescribe a topical corticosteroid and Alicia prescribes another topical steroid and the patient actually gets two different information, nobody knows how much to use and there's no standardized formulation, how much to use. So that is why internationally there is something called the fingertip unit. That means from the end of the index finger up to the distal crease. This area is called one fingertip unit for that particular individual. If it is a child's fingertip unit, that much only that is required. So each of those fingertip units for 3 to 6 months old, if it is entire face and neck, 1 FTU is sufficient. If it is entire arm and hand, 1 FTU is sufficient. So these, they will not apply excessively. This is a standardized method of giving the fingertip unit. It is a little cumbersome, but at least if you can tell the patients that use very small quantities, if the entire face is involved, you show roughly around half a fingertip unit and apply it in multiple areas and then gently massage it. That's the way you have to demonstrate this. Show it to them as to how it is to be applied. Then they understand this much better. You don't need a medication, but at least instruct as if you are play acting. Very small amounts, apply just like you would apply a face cream. So here and there you add spots and then gently massage it. That is the way, when you show that, patients definitely will understand it much better and somewhat this fingertip unit will be followed. This can be also a short note. Topical corticosteroids and fingertip units were short notes for us, but I do not know whether you all would be asked, but it's good to know that there is something called a fingertip unit. So for each of the years, we have different fingertip units. Coming to this tacrolimus and pimecrolimus, these are the two, for about 2 decades, we have been using this. For about 20 years, we've been using as steroid sparing agent. It has good relief. As a standalone, it does not give relief. But you initially give a topical corticosteroid, you get out of the topical corticosteroid, you can maintain this with a similar effects if you have these two products. Tacrolimus is available as two strengths, 0.03% and 0.1%. 0.1% is called Fort. There are other agents which are used non-specifically. One is vitamin D3 analogs. Calcipotriol topically is also beneficial. It has an anti-inflammatory effect. Then I mentioned about those which contain filaggrin products. So Cetaphil, Restorodom and Aveeno, they are patented products. So you can use the same name. This is a new topical which has come into the market, not in the Indian market. It's available in the international market. It's called Crisaborole. It's a phosphodiesterase 4 inhibitor. It decreases the cyclic AMP, therefore the inflammation is brought down. Very often people ask about diet in atopics. I had mentioned about this earlier. These are some of the common things which cause allergies in atopics. But this list is not something, this is something for your education, but not always that the same list should be there. It can be something out of this list also. Okay. So just make sure that you just read about these, which are the common irritants which can cause protein contact dermatitis, either in the form of a diet or in the form of latex or in the form of insects. All of these are proteinaceous substances which can. We often notice that patients who are having acute flares of atopy can also develop when they take a very high protein diet. Somebody who is given a egg in the morning, afternoon they have a chicken biryani and evening they have a puffs outside. And finally, they end up with a protein shake, milkshake, continuously for a few days when all of the relatives are there around. Fourth day or fifth day, they come up with an acute exacerbation. Very high protein intake, shellfish especially, is well known to cause acute exacerbation. So watch out for these. So you have to ask the history intelligently. Was there an event at home? Was there an event where everybody was together? Was there an event wherein shrimp or shellfish were served? So these questions have to come from you as a doctor. There's another concept called the wet trap therapy, which I was referring to earlier. This is something which is used in patients with extensive atopic eczema. Right? Here, you soak the wraps in warm water, bathe the child in warm but not hot, warm water for 15 to 20 minutes and use a gentle cleanser. And then lightly pat the child's skin dry with a towel. Then apply the lotion or the prescribed cream within 3 minutes. This is what I was referring to, the moisturizer. It can be, or any lotion which you are using. Wring out the excess water from the wrap and immediately dress the child in damp wrap to seal in the moisture. So as soon as the moisture is applied, then you are putting a damp wrap onto the child. So the child wears this sort of a suit. And then it is kept on for some time. So that way the child will not have any itch and is very comfortable and soothing for that child to have it. So most of the conditions where there is an epidermal barrier breakage, you can always do this wet trap therapy. The only problem with wet trap therapy is sudden cold response. Sometimes children go in for vasospasm and children even go in for bronchospasm. So you should always make sure that it is warm and preferably applied in portions. Each part it is applied. And then you can give a warm cotton material as a coat. Right? So this is called wet trap therapy. This is very popularly used in abroad for atopic eczema patients who have extensive. Phototherapy is something which is also used where narrowband ultraviolet B is used. Ultraviolet A is actually irritant. It causes exacerbation. So you have to use, you cannot use PUVA. Here you use narrowband ultraviolet UVB. This is more often used in patients with hand eczema. And in those who have non-inflamed skin, never give phototherapy in an inflamed skin. So you are the pediatrician who is actually seeing a patient with an atopy and you see an eczematous atopic lesion. I said, you can use phototherapy. You refer to phototherapy to me. I'll send you back at the same speed. Right? Never give it in an inflamed skin. It will cause more damage and the child becomes more irritable and child might even develop febrile episodes and seizures. Now, there are a lot of systemic immunosuppressants which are used for atopy. All of these you know, you've heard of: methotrexate, azathioprine, cyclosporin, mycophenolate, mofetil. But what has come new is dupilumab. This is going to be the game changer now in atopic eczema. It is a IL-4 receptor inhibitor. IL-4 receptor, interleukin 4. So they have identified that interleukin 4 has an important role to play. So that is going to come into the market. Just about last month, I was informed by GSK that they are going to import it right now. Probably another 2-3 years, they will start bringing it into the very prohibitively expensive, around 1 to 1.5 lakhs only. Antimicrobials and antiseptics, antihistamine. Omalizumab has been tried, but not great results. Then probiotics is something which is cost effective. This algorithm, you can get it from our website of our Indian Journal of Dermatology. Indian Journal of Dermatology. There are two journals from our side. Indian Journal of Venereal Leprology, IJDVL, and the other is IJD, which is Indian Journal of Dermatology. So go to Indian Journal of Dermatology. There is a symposium on atopic eczema, and guidelines are also provided, just 2019 guidelines. So this you can go through and you will get a summary of what I have said and what is to be used as first line, second line, third line, and fourth line, and maintenance therapy. And the adjuvant therapy is also given by the side. This you can use as a ready reckoner. You can keep it on your desktop so that you are free to use this whenever a patient comes up and when you don't have dermatology guidance.